Tonight, Question Time has come to Sunderland. A city once world famous for shipbuilding and glass making, now the headquarters of Nissan in the UK, is also home to the mighty Black Cats, who after a couple of lean years are riding high in the Premier League. And our audience members arriving here this evening, as every week, reflect the general political picture across the nation. And they want to ask, why is it so hard to keep prisoners in prison? Rachel Reeves, should she quit if she raises taxes? And with the big climate conference taking place in Brazil, should we be doing more here to prevent climate change? Welcome to Question Time in Sunderland. Anna Turley. She is chair of the Labour Party and a Cabinet Office Minister. She's also the MP for Redcar, just down the coast in North Yorkshire. Graham Stuart was the Conservative Net Zero Minister under Rishi Sunak and led the UK delegation at COP28 in Dubai. Paul Nowak is the General Secretary of the Trades Union Congress, representing 47 unions with 5.5 million members. And Tim Stanley is a columnist for the Daily Telegraph, an historian, and presents the Daily Tea podcast. Welcome to our panellists, welcome to our audience here in Sunderland. Very nice to see you all, and welcome to you at home as well. Joining the conversation on social media, or just sit back and watch the programme, whichever is your preference. Right, let's kick off with our first question, which is from Lynn Johnson.
Hello, I just wanted to know, how hard can it be to keep the correct prisoners in prison?
Well, I can't think what you're referring to, Lynn. So, 2 prisoners released accidentally from Wandsworth Prison in the last week. I mean, there have been others, as we know. Even though the Justice Secretary, David Lammy, said he'd introduce the strongest checks ever to prevent such a thing. Anna?
I completely agree. I cannot understand how this is able to happen. It's been absolutely shocking. The first incident that really came to light a few weeks ago was shocking enough, but to now hear not only are there other incidents, but this is something that is happening and has been happening for many years, almost on a monthly basis. This is not how we expect our criminal justice system to run. We want to feel safe and secure in our communities. So I'm really astounded that this has just been almost accepted as a sort of state of natural disorder, and it's not acceptable. I'm really glad that David Lammy is...
You say it's been accepted. Is anyone here accepting it?
Within the system, it seems to be that this is just how things run, with this sort of chaos, and it's shocking. So for me, I can't understand in this day and age why we're still having people carrying huge boxes of paperwork around, how things can get lost. I don't understand why there aren't second and third checks. So I know that the Justice Secretary has called all the prison officers in to discuss it with him this week, but I think we need an urgent review of this. I know he's undertaking that, but we cannot allow this to go on, and I'm not going to sit here and point at other parties, because this has been going on for some time. We have to take responsibility for it now. We have to invest in our prisons, our justice system, and David Lammy is absolutely determined to do that.
Well, listen, you mentioned David Lammy. Just clear up one thing for me, because after... I mean, this kind of came to... This has been happening for years, as you say, but it came to prominence with a man called Hadush Kabati, who was accidentally released. David Lammy, the Justice Secretary, said he had introduced stronger checks before inmates were released, and he said they would be effective immediately on the 27th of October. 2 days later, the 29th of October, when Sharif was released accidentally, David Lammy said... He said only the other day, actually, those checks were not in place. Now, both those things cannot be true. Were they in place, as he said, on the 27th of October, or were they actually not in place by the 29th of October?
He's obviously called for them to be in place by the 27th of October, and the fact
no,
that
he said they were in place.
Well,
those two things cannot both be true.
So they obviously weren't in place because something's happened. But
even though he said they were, and the Minister of Justice put out a statement saying they were.
But so he's called for that to happen, and it's clearly not happened. So something is going fundamentally wrong in the system.
He didn't call for it to happen. In fairness, he said it was happening.
OK, well, yeah, he obviously, as Secretary of State, so often I'm sure you put out this is going to happen from now onwards. And there's obviously such an issue with our system, the chaos that it's in. This cannot continue. And I think this is, for me, I look at this feels like another rock that we've lifted up, and there's just such a mess underneath that we've got to sort out. I feel like our public services have been eroded over so many years that they're in a state of chaos, and there are lots of good people working within that system, but they're just not able to do it because they're overstretched. They're absolutely, pushed to rack and ruin, and now they're struggling to really get a grip of the system, and we haven't put the infrastructure in place to support them.
Graham.
I thought we were going to the audience. If one person is released from prison who shouldn't be by accident, that's unacceptable, isn't it? And the truth is, Anna's quite right about that. The number released in the first year since Labour came to power, and this is an interesting thing to investigate, is more than the previous 3 years. So something has gone badly wrong since Labour and now David Lammy are in charge. And of course, he came to the House of Commons. He was asked 5 times to be open about it, and we thought maybe he didn't know. Turned out he'd been told the night before. He then claimed in PMQs that he was out buying a suit in the morning. So he'd been told that people had been let out. He then said he was buying a suit. Apparently that story has changed as well. They really are, I think, the most dishonest government I've ever come across. And you may think that we set a bar there at times. And I'd understand that. But it's day after day, isn't it? I mean,
but hang on, let's talk about your record, Graham. Graham, let's talk about your record. I mean, at best, when the Conservatives were power, there was 1 accidental prisoner release a week. When it was at its worst, it was 2 a week. And 7,000 prisoners' officers left the service.
Every single one of those is unacceptable, Fiona. And that's what I said, every single one. More than 3 years' worth in 1 year since Labour came to power. So it's not this idea which Anna tried to peddle that somehow we've got these broken public services and they're going to fix the foundations. And that story, we've heard so much of that. The truth is, everything has got worse. More people released in error in 1 year than in the previous 3 years, even though anyone being released accidentally is unacceptable. And then we have a Secretary of State, no less than a Deputy Prime Minister, in the House of Commons, answering to the people and refusing to answer the question, even though in the file in front of him, he actually had the details. We've got a government which promised to be more transparent, to be more open, to set higher standards than they'd seen under the Conservatives, and they've done the exact opposite. And they're resigning week after week. And we're barely going to even mention today that the Chancellor of the Exchequer committed a criminal offence in collecting rent for a year without getting a licence. A licence which she first of all said, a bit like David Lammy, she didn't know about. She and her husband didn't know they had to have one. Then it turned out that 2 agents, not 1, had told them they did.
Hang on,
they collected rent for a year, and she didn't resign either. The whole thing is a mess. It's about trust.
The estate agent in the case of Rachel Reeves basically said it was our fault. We said we'd do it on her behalf, and we didn't. That's what emerged.
The law, Fiona, if that's your role is to play setting out the objective truth, the law is that it is the responsibility of the landlord. Landlords lose their houses and their livelihoods because they have that personal responsibility. How is it that anyone in this audience would be prosecuted for a crime, but if you're the Chancellor of the Exchequer, apparently even you at the BBC are saying, oh no, it was someone else's fault, they just broke a rule. It wasn't the rule,
Graham
it was a law.
Stuart, even we at the BBC are saying that. The estate agent. These are not my words, they're the words of the estate agent in question. Please
the estate agent isn't a lawyer.
Please do not put those words into my mouth.
We all heard, heard what you said, Fiona.
Yeah, I'm quoting the estate agent. The man at the back in the white shirt.
My concern is if David Lammy is the Deputy Prime Minister and he gives his word that something's in place, and it clearly wasn't, then as a Labour voter myself, and I hate to say this, then I can't trust what you tell me. I should have the categorical assurance of you're telling me from that position of power that that's in place, and clearly it wasn't, then why should I trust you?
I know you want to come back now. There's a man at the back. I can see the arm, but I can't see who it's attached to. Yes, you with the glasses, I think.
Yeah, it's all fair, fine and well, playing the sort of whataboutism game about Labour's figures being higher in terms of releases than the Conservatives. But if 1 is too many, then why in 15 years did more than 1 ever happen?
Yeah. How?
Man here in the front.
I watched the news today and the levels of sickness within the prison service are skyrocketing. That needs seriously readdressing. And why it's happening, we do not know. And when new employment right comes in, where you can claim sickness from day one in the job, it is going to be merry hell, may I say.
So at Wandsworth, where these two prisoners were released accidentally, something like a third of prison staff are not available for work on any given day because of sickness or because of training. Paul?
Yeah, well, first of all, let's just say ministers obviously do have to take responsibility. I find it very difficult, Graham, to sit there, you with a straight face, and talk about neglect of public services when you consider the track record of your government, the government you were a member of for 14 years, because it doesn't matter every single aspect of our public realm, but in particular our criminal justice system, in our courts, our probation services, where we've got 25% staff vacancies, in our prisons. Let's remember, our prisons are at 99% capacity. The staff every single day face the threat of violent assaults, harassment from prisoners. They are at breaking point. That partly explains the issues around staff absences. I've been in prisons with prison staff and prison officers. I can tell you it's quite a difficult environment to work in. There are obviously individual mistakes, and those mistakes need to be rectified. But this is it's a systemic failure, and it represents 14 years of neglect.
Why is it 3 times more now than it was when the Conservatives left power, Paul? If your point was valid, Graham, why has it tripled?
Graham,
why is it tripled?
If we can finish the point. When you cut criminal justice funding by 22%, it's going to have an impact somewhere. Now, it's absolutely right, as I said, right at the outset, that government ministers take responsibility. But I don't think anyone should take lectures from a government that presided over a decade and a half of austerity, Graham, about the state of our prisons or any other public service.
And just because, why has it gone up? Because it has spiked under the new government.
There's a range of reasons. Partly it's the pressures that those staff are under. Also, remember, under Graham's government, the government increased the pension age for prison officers to 68. I don't know how many members of this audience would fancy being on a ward with dozens of young men, many of them violent offenders, at the age of 67, 68. It's a difficult and, at times, dangerous job. Staff are assaulted every single day. That partly explains why sickness levels are high.
Tim?
I just don't get it. The one point of prison is to keep people inside it. So how do you end up shuttling people out of it? And in the case of Kibatu, the Ethiopian gentleman, he actually said to them, I don't think I'm supposed to go. And they insisted he leave and gave him £76 as pocket money. Now, when this sort of thing goes on, I hope someone gets sacked, because a Wally is involved here. It might be a minister, it might be someone junior. But I don't like the idea that this sort of outrageous thing might occur and no one takes any responsibility for it, especially as it now seems, because one of the prisoners has returned himself to prison, that our justice system is dependent upon the honesty of our crooks in order to keep people inside. Right? Now, we can have the soap opera, as we've just had, of your government did this, your government did that. The truth is it is a systemic failure. It's an institutional failure. It's a consequence in part of austerity. It's a consequence of a population which has said, we want everyone to be locked up, but weren't willing to pay the taxes to build the prisons to put people in them. It's a consequence of an approach towards prisons which has emphasised privatisation and the hiring of private security firms. And very often people are running prisons who are not suitable to do it. It used to be, in the good old days, during the war, people would go from the military to working in prisons. Kind of tough old lags would staff them. Quite clearly, people are now overwhelmed. Just look at the number of scandals of people having sex with prisoners. I mean, that's another pretty good indicator that something's going wrong. Our prison system is a strange mix of very, very cruel, locking people up for long periods of time, giving them nothing to do, young men who have no hope, who are not being retrained, at some point will be released into the community where they know nothing but crime. On the one hand, it's cruel. On the other hand, it is clearly too liberal and too lax. Let's sack a couple of people, but let's also have a discussion about how to fix a systemic problem.
Are you talking in government or are you talking in prisons?
I mean the people who let them out. And like there was an MP in Parliament who said, I hope no one person is used as a scapegoat for this. No, I hope they are. And this is part of the problem. There is no sense of responsibility in so much of our culture nowadays. This is the original question. This was the original question. How did it happen? Someone screwed up. Someone must go, and we want reassurance that this isn't just covered up and people aren't just moved on, but someone pays the price for this decision.
Okay.
I know you're a trade unionist, you won't like that.
But I think the point is, Tim, what you don't want is a scapegoat. What you want to do is go through a proper process and find out what was the mistake that lay behind those people being released. I agree with you entirely about what is the point of prison. 80% of offences are carried out by people re-offending. Clearly, our prison system isn't working, and it's not helped by the fact that we've got 25% vacancies amongst probation officers as well. The people who should be helping people, rehabilitating the community, just aren't there and aren't available to do the job.
Right. There's a woman at the back with her hand up.
If we're looking at trying to reform prisons, OK, Labour might say that they're going to do that now, but how do we know they're going to? Because if they're already saying, oh, we've got this in place, we've got that in place, and they don't, I find it laughable that we're expected to vote for them again in the next general election, and we're expected to rely on them to fix all of these issues when they're already lying about what they have done.
Right, well, that's two criticising citizens of Labour coming your way. Do you want to answer?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting. I agree with a lot of what Tim said about responsibility, but it's not just one-off. This is a systemic issue, like you said. So how have we got to this situation? Because we've seen so much chronic underfunding. The Ministry of Justice budget was slashed by a third. So people might not have seen that over the last 15 years because, like you said, prisons are often the people behind the scenes or people that are out of the way of society. And the consequences are now being felt of those 14 years.
What the man in the white shirt and the woman just now are talking basically is about the credibility of Labour.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we've had 15 months, and in that time we've committed to the biggest prison building programme since the Victorian era. So we're going to really... we've already started... David Lammy was out today digging the ground in building new prison places. When there was only 500 prison places built under the last Conservative government, you can't possibly expect a burgeoning prison population and the staff to be able to cope with that. That's why we're in the mess we're in, because the system hasn't been funded properly, it's not been supported, it's not been modernised, and then we end up in this situation where it's got really damaging consequences for the community. This is the reality of austerity playing at large.
Lynn, you asked that question, you got your hand up again.
Yes, I'm just a bit fed up of Labour and Conservative both playing the sort of political blame game on this issue. I just think it's far more important than that, and they actually need to get their heads together and sort it out between them with some cooperation, and it should never happen again.
Graham?
Well, you're absolutely right that it shouldn't happen again. But our role as His Majesty's opposition is to hold the government to account. And you will, I'm sure, have been tired of hearing 14 years all the time. The Conservatives were thrown out. We lost. Hands up. We lost the trust of the people. And now we have a government in power, and it needs to take responsibility. It's fair to point to the things which came through from the Conservative years. But equally, we want a change in culture from the government that we have today to accept responsibility for what it's done and what it does. And from that, we do have a sort of adversarial politics, and some people say, why can't you all just work together? Well, I think there's only one thing worse than politicians seemingly politicking or whatever, holding each other to account, and that's when we all stand together in a row and say, we're here for you. I think at least we have a system in which you'll be called out. We were called out, and it's right that we call them out, and then you get to decide what your judgment is as to who would be best to lead the country. And at the moment, they're not doing a very good job on this and many other areas. But
there were plenty of these releases under your government, apparently, as well. So you're just as much to blame.
That's as I said, it did happen. All right. But it's worth saying that the more released in the first year of Labour, and we haven't got to the bottom of why that was, but more released in the first year of Labour than the previous 3 years under the Conservatives. And I think if those facts are true, then it's worth reflecting on.
Well, the facts are there were 17 people released a month under the Conservatives. There are 22 under Labour. Now, I appreciate that is absolutely going in the wrong direction. We have to handle that.
And why is that then?
We've got a review coming that David Lammy's just asked for because we've got to understand why that is. But for me, like I said,
you must have some idea.
We're
not all discussing it.
But it's not as if we've come in and said, well, this isn't a priority for us. We've absolutely been clear that prison is a huge priority for us. That's why we've put a huge amount of investment into it. It's a massive priority because
so
we came in realising...
more people are being released, and in the government you had no idea why?
Because these are errors, they're mistakes, they're not deliberate policy ideas. So we've got to work out why the system is really failing. But we're about to have a budget where we're going to have some difficult choices to make.
Yes, one of those is
about whether we invest in our public services.
All right, no, that's not going to find it.
Because that wasn't true. The Justice, I checked it, double-checked it today, the numbers, and there were more released in the first year that Labour was in power than in the previous 3 years. So it didn't move up by a little bit, it moved up by a lot. But Anna got those numbers incorrect, that's all I'm saying.
OK. Right. We started already. Let me tell you where we are next week. Next week we're in London, and the week after that we're in Loughborough. So if you want to come and be part of the audience and put your questions to our panel, London or Loughborough, go to the Question Time website and all the instructions are there, and hopefully we will see you. London next week. Right. You mentioned difficult decisions coming, and I think we might have a question about that. John Goodfellow.
If Labour break the manifesto commitment on tax, should Starmer and Reeves resign?
Should they resign? So, obviously, we had Rachel Reeves this week making a very unusual speech in which she said lots of things. Nothing specific in terms of what's coming in the budget later this month, but she did say we will all have to contribute to that effort. Each of us must do our bit.
We already are.
Which is set a hair running about an increase in taxes. Tim, should Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves resign if they do increase taxes and break their manifesto commitment?
No, in a fantasy world, yes, but obviously not, because they're not going to present a budget and then say, right, I'm done, sit down and resign on the spot. I mean, that would be absurd. But I was serious in my shouting there. I hate it when chancellors say you've all got to contribute, as if we haven't been doing that, as if you and I have just been milking the state. And finally, the good times are over, and finally we have to dig into our pockets. In fact, when Labour talks about the worst inheritance since the war, well, one of the metrics of the worst inheritance is that taxes are so high. That's one of the problems. And she's going to present it to us that she has no choice. Well, that proposition is wrong on two fronts. First, the idea that she inherited a situation that was just absolutely dreadful, and she's done what little she could to fix it. In fact, the economy was doing OK. The deficit was under control. There was some growth. Interest rates have been cut. Well done. Thank you, Labour. They've been cutting interest rates. She made a choice to spend more, to borrow more, and to tax more. And some of those tax choices have then suppressed growth. And the second reason why that I have no choice is wrong is because there is one thing she could do, and that is significantly cut spending. But we learnt in the last year with the failed welfare reform bill that because Labour is now controlled by its backbenchers, it can't do those kind of cuts. So she has brought us to this position where we need to do something about the deficit in order to calm the markets. It is Labour's default position that that must come through tax rises. And the tragedy is you know how this ends. Every time you do this with tax, never mind us having to pay more, it also squeezes the economy, reduces the growth, and creates a spiral down where you just have to end up taxing more in the first place. I'm afraid this is how so many Labour governments have ended.
Well, I think, we know that Rachel's got some very, very difficult choices ahead of her. We've had a year of stabilising the economy, but we've got that choice ahead of us is, do we want to return to austerity or do we want to continue the renewal and the regrowth of Britain? And we've just had a conversation about what austerity looks like and what the impact of public service cuts are. We want to get the NHS back on its feet, and we've already delivered, talking about manifesto commitments, 5 million new appointments, well over and above our manifesto commitment already. We're delivering on our manifesto, we're reforming public services, and if we want to continue to build that and support our children, our young people, and invest in the services people care about, we're going to have to make some very difficult decisions in the coming weeks.
But given that not raising income tax, VAT or national insurance was a key manifesto pledge, it wasn't one around the edges, it was absolutely core and central to Labour's offering at the general election. If the Chancellor does break one of those pledges, how is anyone ever going to believe Labour again?
Well, I'm not privy to what's in the budget coming up, so I can't speculate on that. But I think the reality is, none of us would want to. We were all elected on that manifesto. None of us would want to do this. But if you're faced with a choice, which is either we just continue to go down a path of austerity, continue to cut back, to reduce the growth. I mean, and the situation we're in is simply untenable. At the moment, 1 in every £10 of government spending is going into servicing our debt. We've got to bring that down. We've got to make sure we continue to invest in public services, because without investing in our jobs, our industry, our skills, our education, our NHS, we're not going to have a flourishing country that can be economically viable.
Lots of hands up. Let's hear from some of you. Yes, the man in the glasses towards the middle. Yes.
Labour said in the manifesto that they weren't going to increase taxes. That's the first one. And then about a year ago, Rachel also said I'll not raise any future taxes. This is a once-only event. Doing it once is careless. Doing it twice is unforgivable. You'll never be forgiven.
Woman in the red cardigan.
What concerns me is that we've already got a fifth of children in the North East living in poverty. We're going to raise taxes. That figure's going to rise. What are we going to, how are we going to deal with that?
Okay. Man there in the glasses, yeah.
Speeches this week, and one of them, Nigel Farage on Reform, rode back on a lot of commitments that they made last year. Isn't it time that politicians actually trying to form some consensus and work together to get out of this mess, rather than being left and right and comparing ideologies?
Okay, so another call for consensus, right? Woman here in the front.
I think a manifesto should be seen as a legally binding document, and political parties, when they're formulating them, should take it very seriously that they might be charged with something if they break them.
And do you think... I mean, we don't know what's going to happen.
If you send them to prison, they'll just walk straight out.
The question was, should Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer resign? What's your feeling on that?
Well, I think that, yes, they should, actually, if they do it. I don't think they will, because, well, I hope they won't. I hope they've got a bit more respect for us as an electorate, and that they've promised in the manifesto that they're not going to do that.
Okay.
So
Well, certainly, Rachel Reeves was careful not to say that explicitly in her speech, but she was clearly softening us up for something. But we don't know what. Graham.
Thank you. Well, solemn promises were made, weren't they? Absolutely promised to ordinary working people, like people in this audience. We're not going to put up your income tax. We're not going to put up national insurance. We're not going to put up VAT. Then they came in, they invented the black hole, and they said, we are going to put up national insurance last year. And then you'll remember telling the people again and again, studio after studio, visiting the CBI, we will not be back for more. And what happened? Absolutely guaranteed. This was a cast iron guarantee. And what do? They're going to be back for more. They're going to break their promises. And it goes back to the Labour voter who spoke earlier. She said, well, how can I trust a word they say? And the truth is, we can't. They've really, really broken us. And trust was already low. Trust is so important, because how do we maintain a democracy if the words that politicians like me say, you absolutely discount? You don't believe they're going to do it. They don't mean it. And that's one of the things that I'm excited about Kemi Badenoch. She actually is a straight talker. I think she's a woman of principle. She hasn't come out with knee-jerk responses, and she has come forward and said, we're going to tell audiences. They don't want austerity. But the truth is, another word for austerity is living within your means. And it's all very well Anna saying, oh, she doesn't like the level of debt. Well, if you keep spending money you haven't got, you pile up the debt for our children and grandchildren. And you don't want to hear that. On
our schools.
Because the truth is we have to live within our means. That means saying to the prison service, you've got to get by on the budget you've got, and we don't go letting people out who are supposed to be in prison telling us it's because, and we'll have Paul telling us, oh, because it's all because of budget cuts. We have to live within to live within our means. And if at this budget, and it looks, all the signals are they're going to do it, having broken their solemn promise last year, they break all the promises they then made, and we may have done it once, but we won't do it again. They do it this year. Then, of course, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves need to go.
I think it's very difficult for any government minister to take a step back from a manifesto commitment. I'll address that point directly in a moment, but I want to go back to the point that Tim made, where he said that the economy was doing quite well when the government came in. Doing well for who would be the answer, the question that I was asked. Because GDP may have been going up, but most people were in the midst of a cost of living crisis. Wages were stagnant, living standards were falling, hundreds of thousands of people every single week were going to food banks. When I was growing up in Birkenhead, in Merseyside, in the 80s and 90s, town a bit like Sunderland, being poor was something that happened to people who were out of work. Now we've got millions of people who go to work every single day and who still struggle to get by.
So do you think, Paul, do you think that taxes should go up then?
But the woman in the audience talked before about, let me just finish the point, Fiona, about people who were 3 in 10 kids in the North East living in poverty. 70% of those kids have got at least one parent who goes out to work. So they're doing the right thing, but they're still struggling to get by. I think we need the Chancellor to maintain the course she set at the last budget, to invest in our NHS, in our schools, and yes, in our prisons and our other vital public services and infrastructure and industrial strategy.
And where do you think the money for that should come from?
I'll get to that, Fiona, definitely. I think we need to address the cost of living crisis, and I'd like to see the government take action on energy bills.
OK, go on, Paul. Where do you think the money should come from?
They are just the other way.
We're talking about you should.
And I'd like us to address the issue of the two-child benefit cap as well. Of course, we need to find them.
So that's a big shopping list. Where do you think the money should come from?
I think it's time to tax wealth in this country, not workers. I think it's time to tax wealth, not workers. And I'll tell you for why. Because at the same time that millions of people were struggling to pay their energy bills and hundreds of thousands of people were using food banks, we registered a record number of supercars, Lamborghinis, Ferraris, Bugattis last year in the UK. The year before, Porsche had its record year for sales in the UK. Now, I don't begrudge anyone a decent car. I don't begrudge anyone a decent car, but there are certainly some people who weren't living through a cost of living crisis. So taxes on wealth, but also taxes on windfall profits. Our big four banks, between them alone, this year have been making £1 billion in profit each and every single week. What did the Conservatives do in 2023? They cut the bank taxes, the bank surcharge. It's time we ask those with the broadest shoulders to pay a fairer share.
As a trade unionist, you want work, you want businesses.
Absolutely.
People selling fast cars, it might be distasteful, they might be a bit too fast, a bit too red, a bit too big, but it makes money and it creates jobs. And this is the problem with any kind of tax rate, including on wealth. There's a fantasy going around among the left at the moment that there is a sort of hidden pockets of money here and there. It's like behind the sofa, and we can just find it and get it, and we can pay for everything. That money is movable. It will leave. And there's some evidence that rich people are already leaving. And one might not like the rich. They may maybe have too much money, be too smug and all those sorts of awful things, but quite tasteless, people like the Kardashians, gross. But they invest. They create jobs, and actually they are paying the bulk of the taxes as well.
Tim,
so the more we tax them, the more they're going to move overseas, and you'll lose the income.
We always hear these scare stories. We always hear this. We always hear the scare stories about millionaires are going to uproot and leave the UK. The reality is, last year Rachel Reeves did put up taxes on the wealthy. So, for example, we got rid of the loopholes around non-doms. 0.3% of millionaires left the UK last year. Do you know who I worry about? I worry about the doctors and nurses who are leaving the UK to go and work in Australia and elsewhere in the world because we can't afford a decent health service. That's what I worry about.
Woman in the middle there.
Just to go back to your earlier point about you're investing in the children, you're investing in the prison service. How do we trust you when that is not filtering through to the local councils? For example, my 2 children are in a thriving first school that is now being closed. They're being forced into higher class sizes, which we're told don't work. How do we trust you when you are coming out saying all of these wonderful things about education and priorities is our children, but our local councils all following this through?
Man in the glasses, I think you've got a blue sweater on. I think, yeah.
Yeah, as a Labour voter, I don't think they should actually resign because the public services are in such a mess. We do need to get the money from somewhere.
So would you, maybe welcome is too strong a word, but would you be prepared to pay higher taxes?
When I voted, I almost hoped they would go back on that promise, which is a strange thing to hope for. But yeah, maybe definitely focused on the wealthier people, though.
OK. Man here in the front, you're waving your arm at me, so you're saying you very much want to say.
Thank you, Bruce, and my arm's killing us. I've really got to respond directly to that one. I'll tell you a story. In 2010, when Labour bankrupted the country, for the first time, I went with my wife down to the ballot box and I voted saying, let's get these idiots out of power. Now, I'm a retired police officer. At the time, I saw my salary go down year on year. And I was quite happy to do that because when austerity was brought in, it was all about fixing the country's coffers. I was happy to do that. I'm a patriot. Unfortunately, years and years of voting for the Tories, they still didn't fix the problem. And now we've got Labour back in government, blaming 14 years of Tory rule, and they're saying, actually, just trust us. We're going to fix the economy, but we're going to do that while we're picking your pockets. Well, can I possibly trust any of you?
Hang on, let me just say,
I know it's still a really, really difficult time for everyone, and I see it in my community, I see it in the streets, I see it in the doors that I knock. But there are so many things that we are already delivering that I'm genuinely really proud of. I mean, we've had pay rises go up more in 10 months of a Labour government than they did in 10 years of the Tory government. We've had 3 million people get a pay rise on the minimum wage. Now, I know this isn't affecting everyone. It's going to take time for people to feel it. But that together with breakfast clubs, with more free nursery provision, with free school meals, we are desperate to try and lift those children in particular out of poverty that we see so desperately in the North East. This is our mission. We are starting to deliver, but it's going to take a while for us to turn this economy around.
What's the primary way you get people out of poverty? You get them into work. And there are 100, what's the area of the economy which is the best place for young people to get their first chance of a job, for people who are far away, they might have had mental health or other problems, to get into work? Hospitality. 100,000 jobs have gone since Labour came to power. 75. And back to the gentleman there about the 70s, that's exactly what happened. And then they said, it was all fine. The footballers, the film stars, all the people who pay the bulk of tax left. And it was classic socialism. Paul will be Happy because we'd have a more equal society, because all of us would be broke. Winston Churchill said years ago, the vice of capitalism, the nature of capitalism, having a market society, is that you're going to have some people who do really well and others better. But overall, we're better off. And he said the virtue of socialism, it's equal sharing of misery.
You know what, Graham?
And that's exactly what they're delivering.
There speaks a man who's never been in a low-paid, insecure job. Because there are millions of people...
I was a porter at a hotel like you.
There are millions of people who go out to work in this country and work bloody hard, and they're struggling to pay their bills right now. Yeah. And your party votes time and time again against improving people's rights at work. So it's trapping people. 4 million people...
You're trapping people out of work.
4 million people are trapped in insecure employment in this country. They don't know from one week to the next how much they're going to earn. It is hard to build a life when you don't know how much is going to be in your pay pocket. And the government's employment rights bill will go some way to making work pay, and that's what everybody wants to happen.
Three-quarters of those children are in working families. Three-quarters of the children growing up in poverty are in working families. People are doing their best.
And you're about to put their taxes up, having promised you wouldn't. That's why they won't forgive you.
All right, let's take another question, because the budget, when is it? 26th of November or something? We've got a bit of time. I think we're going to be discussing this quite possibly next week and the week after. Right, Tom Hall. Now, Tom Hall, I know you're with Kayla, and you've agreed that you'll ask the question for Tom.
Yeah. So Tom's question is, why is tackling climate change no longer a priority?
Why is tackling climate change no longer a priority? Well, we've got COP30, I think it is, taking place in Brazil, in the Amazon rainforest, as we speak. You were net zero minister. I know this is something you believe in strongly. It's a shame your leader doesn't, though, does she?
Oh, no, she absolutely does. But I was the net zero minister. I was the energy minister through the energy crisis.
She wants to scrap the Climate Change Act, which pledges to reach net zero by 2050. She's basically said it's impossible. She wants to continue drilling for oil and gas, scrap carbon pricing. I mean, I could go on. You can't be happy about that, Graham. Surely that goes against everything you believe in.
Well, Fiona, you obviously, I don't know who does your notes, but I've been on this programme before when I was the energy minister and the net zero minister. And I said then, while we are burning oil and gas, well, we should produce our own. Of course we should. Why would we buy it from abroad, which is fundamentally more insecure, when we're losing jobs here?
But you supported the pledge to get to net zero by 2050.
Why is it always the Conservatives you interrupt? I don't know.
Well, I think you'll find, Graham, that is not true. I'm just simply asking you.
I'm perfectly capable of answering your question about climate change. Climate change is important. It's real. But the Climate Act is no longer fit for purpose. We transformed the energy system in this country. I'm really proud of it. Less than 7% of our electricity came from renewables when Labour left power. 7%, less than. It was nearly 50 when we left power, and I was a minister helping deliver that. But having the highest electricity prices in the world will actually make the country poorer. No one's going to copy us if we make ourselves poor. If we deindustrialise, we'll be nowhere. And therefore, it is right to get rid of the Climate Act, because we've got to make sure that we're pragmatic. The only way we're going to maintain the commitment of this audience to action on climate is if we can make sure that your children and grandchildren in this country are going to be stronger as a result. Instead, we've got a zealot in Ed Miliband who is just determined to do it regardless. And they've said, even though we're going to use oil and gas for decades to come, oh no, the union The TUC members who work in the North Sea, oh no, they can go. And Paul is on the right side of this one, because he has spoken out and recognised that Labour are completely wrong. It is mad for when we're a net importer of oil and gas to stop producing our own. We lose tens of billions of tax, many more jobs in oil and gas than we're getting in the green sector, and we then import it from abroad anyway with higher emissions.
Okay, so
I mean,
just,
it's utterly mad,
clear,
economically mad, and even environmentally mad. Climate change is important, but we've got to be pragmatic. We need to carry people with us. And if we have the highest electricity prices in the world, which we do, well, the big red flashing light issues that I dealt with, heat, how do we change our houses to be heated? You need electricity. How do we change our vehicles? You need electricity. How do you change our industry? You need electricity. If you've got the highest electricity in the world, I tell you, we'll never decarbonise. So it's mad what they're doing.
Just to be clear, all those years as net zero minister, when you talked about the importance of reaching net zero by 2050, it's now no longer important.
Well, it was the law, and I did everything possible, and we met every single carbon budget we had. We never missed. We kept going along. But you're getting to the point, you're looking at it and going, practically, if we just decarbonise regardless of the cost to people here, if the cost of living is biting, it's hurting people, and at the base of our whole society is energy. Keeping your house warm, having the lights on, and having a job you can go to requires affordable energy. That's why we've come up with a cheap energy plan. Kemi Badenoch's had the courage to do it against the overall views, and she's right. And we've got to be practical and pragmatic and do our bit, but do it in a way which makes us stronger, not making us into a worldwide weakling, which is what Ed Miliband is doing right now.
I think both Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage's approach actually will put at risk tens of thousands of good quality jobs here in the UK, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But this is not an either-or. Graham's absolutely right. We're very clear for workers in the North Sea, thousands of good quality jobs in the North Sea. The government needs to set out a very clear plan, a funded plan, about how we're going to transition away from oil and gas in the North Sea. But we do need to tackle climate change. Tom is absolutely right. It is still a priority. It's right for the environment, it's right for the planet, but it's right for good quality jobs here in the UK as well. We've got 6,000 people working on electric vehicles in Nissan just down the road. Last week I was in Jaguar Land Rover, 10,000 jobs in Jaguar Land Rover. Jaguar is transitioning to electric vehicles. The same is happening in green steel. It's happening in our chemicals industry, our cement industry, and we need to see support in those British manufacturing and engineering employees to make that transition. There is a way to get to climate change and at the same time secure good quality employment, whether it's upgrading our energy grid, whether it's building the next generation of new nuclear power, whether it is the next generation of clean green steel. There is no contradiction at all between getting to net zero and good quality jobs and economic success.
So what about licences in the North Sea, Paul? Is the government wrong to ban any new exploration and mean that we're losing tens of thousands of jobs and all the investment is moving elsewhere?
I think you're deliberately putting up a red herring, Graham. We need a clear plan.
What's your answer to that question, Paul?
We need a clear plan to transition. And
so new licences or not?
Well, I think if you can make an economic case for it...
Of course you can. Just give them licences. They'll make the economic case. If we don't need any subsidy, they'll just go and get it, and we'll get our own, and they'll pay tax, and they'll employ British people, your members, and you're betraying them. If you're not prepared to give a straight answer, you're betraying every single one of those
I don't need to tell you how to represent trade union members, and frankly, I mean, you spent enough time attacking trade unions and trade union members with your government.
I gave them jobs.
We are very clear. We've got workers right at the heart of that debate about the future of the North Sea, and we want every single one of those workers to have decent jobs.
Man here in the front in the check shirt. Hang on, let's just get a microphone to you. Wait a minute. There you go.
I'm in favour of net zero, but why are we going to be the ones that pay the price when you've got China, you've got India, you've got the United States all ignoring it?
And the man in the white shirt, you've got your hand up just, yes, towards the middle there. Yeah.
If we continue to drill in the North Sea, is it not just the petrochemical companies, the private organisations that are going to reap the reward? Because aren't Britain just going to buy it at the value if they're going to sell it everywhere else, market price, yeah. So it's not going to come down. We're just going to make rich people more rich.
May I answer that?
Very briefly.
Not true. We tax it. We get tens of billions in tax. Hundreds of thousands of people work in the industry.
But it doesn't make it cheaper. The point you make is it doesn't make it cheaper.
Well, any supply, it's supply and demand makes a difference. We have a European oil market. It's refined and it comes into the products we want. If the Straits of Hormuz get blocked, will suddenly realise how important it was to have oil and gas being produced here in the North Sea, not from somewhere on the other side of the world. We're in a dangerous world, and not producing it here is mad, financially, economically and environmentally.
On that point, the amount of investment currently coming into this country on clean energy is more than double coming in on fossil fuels. It's clean energy is the fastest growing sector in this country.
I'm all in favour of it.
And we're out there on the world
you could have both.
Well, look, yeah, and it's going to be part of our energy transition for decades.
What about new licences, Anna? You know it doesn't make sense.
There is still plenty that we have to. It's going to be part of our energy transition for decades to come. But the priority is about that transition, as you said. And as Paul says, it's about making a sustainable, fair transition to make sure that we support our workforce. In this region, we've got billions of pounds of investment in carbon capture, in renewables, in wind turbines, in sustainable aviation fuel. This is creating so many jobs in the North East. It's reindustrialising areas like Sunderland, areas like Teesside, and it's really, really important we don't put those at risk.
And is the government still committed to no new licences for drilling in the North Sea?
Yes, that's our commitment, but it's still going to be part of the transition for decades to come. We've always been very, very clear of that.
Tim?
I disagree with the premise of the question from Tom, I think, that it isn't a priority. The world seems to be obsessed by it to me, and most of the world's leaders have flown to Brazil. There's an irony.
That are polluting the most, Tim.
But hang on, there's an irony in that, isn't there? That they're all flying to a conference to discuss climate change. Historians will laugh at this. It's just very strange to me. But the future king has gone to it. Our prime minister's there. It clearly matters. And it matters because it's real. The tragedy is because we're in the northern hemisphere, we don't feel climate change in the same way as the poorest parts of the world that feel it the hardest and pay the greatest price for it. We don't experience desertification. We don't experience coastal erosion, which could well lead to the destruction of whole communities. So we feel a little bit insulated from it. We're not aware of how much of a crisis it actually is. And the government is absolutely right that at some point in the future, if we build the infrastructure for it, we could have energy that's not only clean, but cheaper and more secure because we don't rely upon volatile market prices across the world or upon importing from regimes that are bad, etc., etc. And it argues that in order to make sure we get there, we have to impose rules and we have to say no more drilling here, because if we allow any leeway, we'll just fall back into relying upon the fossil fuels and we'll direct investment the wrong way. They're right about all of that. The problem is because they are approaching this from an ideological point of view, they have missed the point about the transition between here and the net zero future. At some point we'll get there, but we're not there yet, and we have to bridge that gap. And that bridge has to involve fossil fuels in some way, especially if, as this government says, it wants to do things like develop AI, which require oodles of energy, which the net zero stuff, it just isn't online yet to deliver to us. So here I do agree with the Tories. I think it's not unreasonable to say, yes, let's stick to the ambition. Let's make sure we get there. We can even put it into law if we like. But there's no reason in the meantime why we shouldn't use some fossil fuels where we need to in order to bridge that gap. I fear that the ideological approach is actually going to sap confidence in it, and it's going to eventually lead to the lights going out because we just aren't producing the energy that we need to sustain our economy.
Woman there in the dark top.
As a form of transition, we're building a lot of new homes in this country. Why are we not building energy-efficient homes with electric charging sockets and solar panels on the roof, which will bring everyone's bills down?
I think we're really committed to that, and I know we've just had a huge announcement on the number of solar panels going onto public buildings, schools and hospitals and so on as well, because where we're building and where we've got public buildings, we should absolutely be using renewable energy to furnish them. So I completely agree with you.
But is it happening?
Yeah, well, Ed Miliband's absolutely committed to it. And as I said, well, you know, I think we've committed to 1.5 million new homes in this country. So I think it's really important we have the highest environmental standards on those. And yeah,
there's a lot of scepticism you're going to get to that 1.5 million, but I'm sure we'll come back to that subject another day. I've got 10 minutes left, and I want to fit in the last question, if you don't mind. Penny Riley-Smith. There you go.
Is the country becoming more violent, or do politicians and the media just make us feel that way?
I want to ask you what you think, Penny. I mean, let's just set the context, if I even need to. Obviously, we've had this horrific mass stabbing on board a train, you know, which ended up diverting to Huntingdon, and the stories we heard from that were absolutely horrendous. And that certainly brought the story, you know, the issue to the forefront. What's your feeling, Penny?
My feeling is that the more we talk about violence, the more it normalises it. So it becomes easier for people to see that as a way forward. And so the people who are minded to be violent are enabled to carry on with their plans.
You think it encourages them?
I think so.
Paul?
Yeah, well, first of all, can I just talk about Huntington? And I just think we should acknowledge the role that Samir Zutan, the guy who fought off the attacker. Andrew Townsend, the train driver who brought that train into Huntington Station, all of the station staff, the emergency responders, the travelling public. And you know what? Out of an horrific incident, it shows the very best of our public servants, and it shows the very best of the British public, I think. I agree with the questioner. The reality is, people are worried about violent crime, but knife crime over the last 5 years has come down, modestly, by 5%, but it's starting to come down. Violent crime is starting to come down, but I understand why people do worry about it. I've got 3 kids. 3 kids, they're in their 20s now, but I worry when they go into town about somebody potentially pulling a knife on them. I'm sure we've all had experiences on public transport and other things where, do you intervene? You know, is that person going to challenge you? Are they going to be carrying a knife? We've been working very closely, for example, with our unions, with supermarkets, in the NHS, working with employers to keep staff safe. I think that's really important, and the government has made progress there as well.
Part of Penny's question was, do politicians and the media make us feel that way, i.e. that the country is becoming more violent?
I think there's a danger that we all put ourselves at, and actually I do think there is something, though, about visible policing, whether it's police or PCSOs. People do feel uncertain, but I do think that we need to take the best out of that, what was a very dreadful incident, and we have to recognise that actually, you know, sometimes the perception of crime is different than the actual reality of crime.
Anna?
Yeah, I agree with Paul. I mean, the statistics are going the right way, but I know for many people it just doesn't feel like that. And I think particularly for our young people, we really do have a crisis of places for them to go, for them having some hope and opportunity in local communities. And we've experienced a couple of really serious incidents in my own constituency recently where there are bikes that are marauding through neighbourhoods. There have been serious attacks. And for people in the community, that's absolutely terrifying. We've got a fantastic police force doing its best, but we had such a huge reduction. Losing 200 officers has an implication on a police force. So we've got to get those numbers back on the beat, and that's why I'm really proud of the commitment that we've made to bring back neighbourhood policing. But it's much more than that. It's not just about dealing with enforcement. We've got to get back to prevention. And when you've seen youth services slashed by 75% in the last 10 years, young people need somewhere safe to go. They need decent role models. They need support to give them places to come, opportunities in work. We're creating youth hubs and things, and opportunities through work and skills to give them something to believe in, something to aim for, and to make sure they've got something purposeful to do.
Look, let me just give you some statistics, because I knew this question was coming when Penny submitted, so I looked it up. So between 2003 and 2025, according to the Office for National Statistics, when it comes to England and Wales, homicide, which is murder and manslaughter, fell by nearly 50%. 50%. And between 2003 and 2025, firearms offences also fell by nearly 50%. Knife crime went up a bit, but now it's going down a bit. Let me just hear a bit from our audience. Yes, the man there with a black top on. Yeah.
I think part of the problem is social media again. You know, we hear about Sadiq's London, and we hear about Elon Musk saying, you know, 500 people in a village, and people coming over and, you know, raping the women. That's insane. I think the problem is that people are living on their phones and they're actually going out there in the streets. You know, people go to London, it's fine. I go a lot, it's absolutely fine. People see on the phones and they think, oh, it's scary now, but they don't leave the home.
OK. This person right at the very back there with glasses. Yeah.
I think you are very, very government ministers and politicians are very, very happy for us to spend our time arguing with each other whether one group is more likely to be violent than the other, when actually 70% of those in working families who are growing up in poverty are in work. We can't afford our energy bills. We can't afford to heat our homes. We can't afford food. 170,000 kids in the northeast of England are growing up in poverty. You are more than happy for us to spend our time arguing with each other than addressing these very, very real issues that are impacting us all.
All right. Well, look, OK. Tim, is the country becoming more violent, or do politicians and the media make us feel that way? I mean, Nigel Farage has said crime has risen so much the UK is facing societal collapse. That's how he's put it.
Yeah. OK, the statistics might show that's wrong, but it's how it feels. And actually how it feels matters, because if nothing else, it means people become imprisoned within their homes.
And does it feel that way because politicians and the media are creating that, do you think?
It may well partly be social media, but hey, we've had a number of... I'm a little bit wary about people saying, you're wrong, crime's down, get over it, you're just being cowards and you're just being manipulated by social media. We've had a number of high-profile attacks which have been really disturbing. And this attack on a train was the sort of thing that really puts a chill down your spine, somewhere you feel should be safe. You can imagine the claustrophobic, intense, awful nature of that crime. And I think saying to people, yeah, but actually, no, statistically, that's quite rare now. I don't think that gives people encouragement. What I'd say is this. All these various attacks we've seen, they share certain things in common. They tend to involve young men. They're very often in mental distress. There's often issues with family breakdown. They are often there's some kind of nebulous, strange politics involved. Not always, but sometimes. I'm not pinning it on a party or anything like that. I'm just saying there's a kind of an uncomfortable thing on social media, the glamorization of violence and its politicization. And I think we as a society have to ask why people are behaving like this. For those who need to be sectioned, let's have strong institutions that can section them. For those that need to be in prison, let's have strong prisons and put them away in them and don't let them out. But I think, as a Christian, I'm required to try and understand why people behave the way they do. And when I see these young people behaving this way, I honestly want to know why. What has happened in someone's life to make them so angry, so lonely, and to want to externalize that violence against other people? That's not an easy conversation to have, because the political thing is to say just lock them up or just section them. But I genuinely think, statistics aside, there's a kind of spiritual sickness in our society. I think we have become a less pleasant, less agreeable place. I don't know how we fix that. This isn't the forum for fixing that. But don't push it under the rug. What we saw on the train was frightening, and it begs questions about the way our society is going.
Is the country becoming more violent, or do politicians and the media make us feel that way?
Well, I think agreed with every word that Paul said, not only the tribute to the driver and the person who put themselves in the way of the attack and taking positives from that, but it's a pleasure for me to find I'm not, in this one way, not in government. Because when I was in government, I'd tell an audience crime has come massively down since 2010. There'd be a groan of disbelief. And the truth is, it has. And I don't agree with Tim. I don't think we're less pleasant and less agreeable. We get so whipped up, and so much, you're looking on your TikTok and all the rest of it. Actually, you look at, if the numbers are real, more real than the feeling. And the feeling may be, oh, I don't quite believe you. Well, I'm not the government now, so I'm not trying to score a political point. The truth is we are less violent than we used to be. And I think we're probably more agreeable, more polite than we used to be, which goes against, as you get older, everyone says it was great before and it's awful today. The truth is the youth of today, overall, are probably much nicer than we were when I was young. And I think we should celebrate the fact that we are factually, and the data does matter, we are a less violent society. We're a multicultural society. We've got all sorts of issues, integration, immigration, the rest of it. But you know what? Violent crime has come down. This is a brilliant country with people from all over the world. We should celebrate that, and we should resist the siren voices. I hate to pick on him, but people like Nigel Farage, who try to tell us all that everything's broken. It isn't.
All right, our time is up. Forgive me, those who got your hands up. I'm afraid we have run out of time. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you to the audience here in Sunderland for putting all your points so powerfully. And, of course, thank you to you at home for watching. Remember, next week we're in London, and the week after that we're in Loughborough if you want to come and apply and be part of the audience. But for now, from Question Time in Sunderland, bye-bye.